hello. I never do this at the start of my podcast, but I'm going to do a bit of an opening monologue. Hi, my name is Richard, and you are listening to Places Please, Richard's theatre podcast. It is not coming out weekly, is what we've learned from this experience. I set out with really good intentions, and I did not deliver. So they're kind of coming out sporadically. I'm hoping to kind of work on that. Just the editing process takes a bit of time and getting used to that. But yes, hello. If you're new here, welcome. This is a podcast all about the process behind theatre. If you are here, a returning guest, thank you so much for continuing to listen to the podcast and understanding all of the kind of teething problems that you have when you release a podcast for the first time. I appreciate it. Guys, it's been a bit of a crazy journey. I set out to do this podcast just for a bit of fun. I felt there was especially in Ireland, there's a lack of a place for theatre makers to share their voice and share their experiences. And growing up, that was always something I was really interested in, is how do you make something? How do you start something? And I'm hoping that if you are somebody who is a theatre maker or an up-and-coming artist, or you maybe just have a joy for theatre, that you're finding these podcasts really interesting. The same with I am. I'm learning so much from our guests, and especially our guest today. Before I introduce that guest, though, I wanted just to let you know that we are coming to the end of season 1. And we have kind of shot all of the guests that we're going to have for season 1, and now starting to look at season 2. We're booking for season 2. So if you're an artist or a theatre maker in Ireland or abroad that creates something and you'd like to share that with us, please contact me. You can get my email is underneath all the descriptions. It's placespleasepod@gmail.com, or if you want to reach out by Instagram, you can do so at Richard's Theatre Reviews. I'm more than happy to help you out. If you've got a show coming up that you want to promote, that is kind of the idea behind this podcast, is just sharing information with people. So please do come on, and especially if you're doing a show within the Edinburgh Fringe. I'm going to be travelling across in August to do kind of more in-person interviews, but we're hoping to have a few episodes up about the Edinburgh Fringe, especially June, July and August, because I'm not going to be in work during those times. School is going to be out, so I'll have more time to edit and to spend time on this. So if you want me to come along to a show, or if you want me to give a review, or you want to be involved in the podcast, please do reach out as early as possible, because I'm going to have my slots filling up pretty quick. And yeah, if you're liking this podcast, please do follow along. You can follow on Spotify, you can subscribe on YouTube, or you can come follow me on Instagram. And I kind of try to keep up to date with that kind of stuff. If you have any suggestions or feedback, please let me know in the comments, good or bad. I'm more than happy to take on some criticism and to learn. And yeah, I think I've done enough talking, and this has been awkward enough. I'm going to get used to this part, but I'm going to talk a little bit about my guest this week. Today's guest is Anna Newell, and Anna is one of Ireland's leading theatre makers for young audiences and creates these unique theatre adventures for babies and early years and children and young people with complex needs. Now, when I tell you how excited I got when I heard that I was going to get to interview Anna, I feel like this is something completely different and really is outside of my wheelhouse as a theatre maker and creator. So having a chance to chat to Anna really was going to open up my horizons to what is accessible and what is inclusive in relation to theatre adventures. But when I tell you how amazing Anna is as a person and as a theatre maker, I was just in awe this entire interview, which you'll see and you'll hear me say a few times. So I want you to sit back, relax and enjoy Places Please with Anna Newell. Hello, Anna. Could you maybe describe yourself to my audience, maybe explain a little bit of what you do?
So I have been making theatre adventures for all kinds of audiences since 1989. And for the first 20 years of my career, I was kind of making, I guess, what people think of when you think of theatre. So big shows in big spaces for adults. And then I started to get really interested in working for young audiences. And that kind of started about 15 or so years ago. And as I've got older and older and older, my audiences have got younger. And so now all the work that I make, since I relocated from Belfast down to Bray in just about 10 years ago, almost exactly 10 years ago, has been for what I call extraordinary audiences, which is babies under one and children and young people with complex needs. And I refer to them as adventures, I guess, because partly I'm trying to get away from the language of workshops or sessions, because it very much is a journey that we go on with our audience. It's that kind of heightened dreamlike moment that you have when you're watching a show. But then sometimes the word show sounds like something that you do at people. And the shows are really, really responsive. We have really tiny audience numbers. So for the work for children and young people with complex needs, we have 3 performers in the current show, and we have 3 audience members at a time. And for the babies under one, we have a slightly bigger capacity, so we would tend to have, for example, 4 performers and 8, 10, 12 babies. And it's very much about creating a space where nothing is expected of the audience, but anything is possible within everybody keeping safe and comfortable. So, for example, the show that we are touring at the moment is a show called Up in the Clouds, which is for our audience of children and young people with complex needs. We toured last year, we made it last year, and we did 144 shows of it. And every single one was different because so much of it is informed by who the audience is. I guess one of the best ways of describing it I stumbled upon about 3 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now. I made a show called Groove, which I called a 70s inspired happening for children and young people with complex needs. And I looked up the definition of happening in that kind of performance context, and it said there is visuals and there is music, but everything else is completely informed and inspired by who is there in that particular moment. And for me, that felt like what we do.
And how do you even like start the process of creating a theatre adventure like that?
Some things happen in my head. I make up some things. I decide on a world we might explore like the 70s happening. But the crucial thing about making this work is that our audiences are involved from really, really early on as our creative consultants. So, for example, the very first development week that we might do on a show, if it was a show for our audience with complex needs, we would do it in residency, usually in an amazing school called St Catherine's that's in County Wicklow. And we would mess about with some ideas for a couple of days, and then for the next 3 days, our audience would come in, and not only would we get a sense from them of what we felt was working, what we felt wasn't working, but also sometimes unexpected things would happen, and they would genuinely inform and inspire the direction that the show took. And every single time we make a show or rehearse a show or re-rehearse a show, we would have our audience in from as early as day 3. And interestingly, when I work with performers who I haven't worked with before, that's always terrifying. And they'll say, how can babies be coming in on day 3? We don't know the songs. We don't know what we're doing. It's really scrappy. And then either the babies come in, or depending on what audience it's for, the children with complex needs come in. And then once that's happened, the cast are like, well, how do we rehearse it without them now? So all the actual rehearsal and development happens with the audience. And in between, we're learning bits of music, chatting about what we think worked, talking about putting things in a different order, but all the meat of development and creation and rehearsal and re-rehearsal happens with our audience.
And speaking of performers, is there certain qualities that you look for when you are looking to cast productions that you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really tricky to find performers, in that you are looking, depending on what the show is. Almost all of the shows I make for children and young people with complex needs are very heavily vocal with original harmony singing. Some of the baby shows are that as well. Some of them are contemporary dance shows. So you're looking for people who have really high level of skill in whatever that thing is. But you are, of course, looking for people who can be egoless and who can be responsive and who enjoy the gorgeous roller coaster of working with our audience. And to that end, I often work with performers that I've been working with for a number of years. As 2 or 3 performers who I started working with on the first show that I made when I relocated down here, and some who I still work with, who I worked with in Belfast. And in terms of bringing new performers into the fold, particularly for our audience of children with complex needs, I can't cast people from a couple of hours in a rehearsal room. So what we did towards the end of last year is I had a little bit of funding, and I created a paid opportunity for 4 artists, and the audition was that they spent 2 days with me in a special school, and we put some stuff together, and we tried it out with the pupils in the school, so that as well as exploring, what their vocal ability was, I could get a real sense of how they might work with our audience. And then, people need to be hugely empathetic and aware and switched on to everything that's happening within a space, and absolutely need to be able to leave their ego at the door. There's a story I always tell about how different the shows can be and how glorious that roller coaster is. I have a show called Sing Me to the Sea, which happens in hydrotherapy pools. So both the audience members and their adults and all the performers are in the water. And we often do 3 shows in a day. All the shows are about 20 minutes because that's the length of time that we found that really works. And we did 1 show. And whilst a lot of our audiences wouldn't have traditional verbal communication, the 2 young people I'm going to talk about both did. And in the first show, there was a child who I was pouring water on him and singing to him, and he turned to his mother and he said, "Is this heaven?" And then as he left, he hugged me, and she said, he doesn't hug people. And in the very next show, 15 minutes later, there was a young guy who was looking at me going, "Why are you still singing? What are you doing? Is it finished yet?" And that is the absolute joy of making work with and for these audiences. And so it does require performers who absolutely revel in that, and who revel in the unexpected, and that it's not about creating something and then trying to recreate it. And I realize that I'm in most of the shows. I'm not in the dance shows because, believe me, nobody needs to see that. But I'm in the sung shows, and I didn't used to be. And accidentally, I was in the first show that I developed when I moved down here. In fact, it was the hydrotherapy pool show. In fact, it was the first show I created for kids with complex needs, and I knew I needed somebody in the water who had experience of that audience, and there was nobody available who I'd worked with before. So I thought, well, I'll do it. And I discovered that I adored it. I discovered that by being in every show, I learned a huge amount about it. But I also learned that, as a director, you generally create something and then the cast go off and attempt to recreate that. But you're almost directing it in the moment in these shows. And so whilst I'm not in the dance shows, the choreographer that I work with, she tends to be in them. And there really is an element of something that is genuine within a kind of really rigorously created but hugely flexible dramaturgical structure. The show is co-created between the audience and the performers every single time.
That's so interesting, because whenever I talk to theatre makers, they kind of say that the director should be like nearly separate from the production. But I think in your case, I think it almost enhances the performance, but also then allows you to kind of identify what could be worked on for future productions as well, and where the paths could go.
Absolutely. And there's a load of stuff about this work that is counterintuitive from having worked in more traditional theatres. So, for example, in more traditional theatre, you hide everything, and then you show everybody it, and it's a surprise. Whereas actually, with the work that we do, we tell everybody what's going to happen, because we send a social story that talks about all the things that are going to happen in the show. to the schools that we're going to. We send video versions, we send hard copy versions. When we go to the school, I'll go into the classroom so the pupils can see me prior to coming and seeing the show, because that kind of gradual familiarization works really well. And in fact, we're hoping next year to do a version of Up in the Clouds for babies. And we're going to make another social story, because one of the things that we do quite a lot with the shows for babies is we connect up with organisations like the Children and Young People's Services Committees and other organisations that work with people who are parenting in all kinds of situations, and some of whom would be might be more trepidatious about coming to an arts experience and what might be expected of them, and what happens if their baby cries, and are they going to be asked to join in, and all that kind of stuff. So we're actually going to make a similar social story that says these are all the things that happen, because for our audiences, and I always find that stuff that is true for our audience is kind of true for lots of people, that if people know what's going to happen and what the parameters are of what's expected of them and what's not expected of them, and that they genuinely have agency, and that if they want to leave, they can leave, and all of those things, then people feel safe and they feel anxiety is reduced, and it's much more possible that they're able to engage with this experience and enjoy this experience.
Yeah, especially if you have a very young baby, there's a lot of unknown for you going into that situation of what could happen, and creating the kind of safe uh, parameters so they understand fully what's going to happen would maybe ease tension there. Do you feel like that might be something that you would like to see more in theatre in general around accessibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that makes it more possible for people. I mean, to the extent, even when we go to all kinds of venues, whether it's theatre venues or community venues, I'll always make sure that usually myself or one of the cast is at the door, so that if somebody comes in with a baby and they're looking around and they're like, am I in the right place? Maybe I shouldn't have come. My baby's not feeling so great today, or I'm just feeling completely overwhelmed, or I haven't slept for 3 days, or that I'm there to go, you're in the right place. You're really welcome. Changing it is over here. If you need to change your baby, don't worry if you're late. It's completely fine. And I think just that kind of human generosity um, is a really useful thing.
For sure. And it's so different as well from the traditional sense of, okay, well, it starts at 7:30 sharp and latecomers aren't admitted. And, it's a quiet setting that like you would go into those preconceived notions maybe of what you think theatre is going to be, but it's different in the case of your theatre adventures.
Yeah, and you're always, because it's an ecology of needs. So you're always trying to juggle the people who've arrived really early, or particularly whether our audience of children with complex needs, for whom waiting can be really, really tricky, and people who are running late or who are coming late. Um, and it's a small thing, but when we're in the schools, we've developed a system where we go and collect our audience from their classrooms, so that if there is any waiting, if there is anybody who is having a last minute toilet stop, or who just needs a bit more time before they leave the classroom, that any waiting happens there rather than in their comfortable, familiar environment before they come to the place where everything is not how they expected and might be a little bit overwhelming. Um, and in the same way, there are and it's easier for this to be curated in a school setting, that you might have a child or a young person who is vocalizing all the time, and that's how they engage with the world, and that's completely fine with us. But in the same setting, you might have a child or a young person for whom a lot of loud noises is overstimulating. So the management of that ecology of needs is something that is a real ongoing process. And I think for me, that notion of ecology of needs is at the heart of access, in that I completely understand that, I think whilst hard and fast rules are problematic, that for a lot of people going into a traditional theatre setting and it being really quiet, and there not being other distractions, is something that they find very relaxing, that they find how enables them to engage. and for other people, being able to come and go enables them to engage. And the whole kind of tricky, if you leave, you can't come back thing can be really problematic for people who might not be able to sit still for that long, or who might need to go to the toilet, or that. So it is. I don't think that it is that there are any completely clear cut answers, but I think that a sensitivity and a sense of, as I say, this ecology of needs is an ongoing conversation, I guess.
Anna, you speak so well about those topics. I'm like really interested. I'm actually a secondary school teacher aside from doing this, and I work a lot with students with additional educational needs. And I'm a drama, theatre, and film teacher as well. And I find it really hard to strike the balance between, I want my students to come along and see productions, but then the anxiety and worry for them when you bring them to go see theatre around different elements, and like I can build social stories and supports, but sometimes it can just put them in a situation where they feel so uncomfortable that they don't end up going. And I just would love for theatre to be a little bit more sensitive around that as well, would I think help a lot of people. I think art is so important. Why do you think that your work and the work that you do is important for people to see?
One of the things that I have found is that the younger my audiences have got, and the more profoundly disabled they are perceived to be, the more I get asked, so, what are the educational aims of this work? What are the developmental goals? What are the therapeutic benefits? And it's very easy to get caught up in, like, as we have astonishing stories and feedback about that. But that's something I really push back on all the time, because for me, the absolute main thing is about their fundamental human right to beauty and to high quality arts experiences that are created in a way that engage and delight and enchant them and meet them where they are. And I won't take credit for this one of my performers once said to me, and I think this is true, that if everything in your life has to be educational or developmental or therapeutic, it robs you of your humanity. And one of the things I find for me about this work, and there's kind of no way to say this without it sounding a little bit wanky, is that I find that it connects me with my own humanity and with the humanity of others.
Do you feel like your work has changed who you are as a human then?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we do a lot is one of the big things that parents and teaching staff comment on is less what we do and more how we do it, about our use of silence, there's a thing sometimes I think with both of my audiences where there's this sense of everything needs to be very stimulating, it needs to be bright colours, and it needs to be really exciting and move along. And actually, there's a reason why people spend a lot of money going to spas. And it's because we all crave calm. And if your cognitive processing works relatively slowly and you can't filter, so if there's too much oral noise or visual noise, you're overwhelmed and you cannot engage with what's happening. So we try to create, in fact, the current show was, the sense of what I wanted to make was inspired by something that I think a parent said about a baby show. They said it's like a spa for the soul. And we very, very carefully curate the environment, create the journey into the environment. Because for our audiences, it begins the minute they meet us or the minute they enter a building, if it's not happening in their school. So even, one of the things I always say to performers is nobody thinks it's okay to go up to somebody and shout hello in their face if you've never met them. But people do that all the time to babies and touch them and speak in really high-pitched voices. So we do everything we can to create this really calm space, and the whole, the information and the introduction that we give to parents or teaching staff to allay their anxieties is all part of that. And similarly, for a lot of the shows, we use portable performance spaces, which is and posh way of saying tents. And what that means, and we do that for two reasons, one political and one scientific. So the scientific reason is that it removes all visual noise, so that if I introduce an object into it, or if I begin to sing, there's not a load of other things to be looking at that make that difficult. And I know lots of adults, kind of more neurotypical adults, will come into the space and say, this is really relaxing. And it's because I can be a bit geeky about the little bit of neuroscience that I know, that the muscle that is filtering all the time, that was just doing that automatically, that we're not aware of, that switches off, which is why the space feels relaxing. And the political reason is because it means when you're inside the tent, the show is exactly the same, whether you're in a school or a community centre or the back room of a library or a gym. And in fact, one of the things I'm most proud of, the very first baby show that I made when I was in Belfast went to Broadway. It went to a theatre called the New Victory, which specialises in children's theatre. But actually, what I'm most proud of is the show that played off Broadway in that theatre. Was exactly the same in every single detail as the show that we played in church halls in places in Northern Ireland where people were parenting in really, really difficult situations. And for me, that's an indication of how important they are.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know they went to Broadway. That's
They did. I know, that was very exciting. I'm going to Canada this year with I'm part of the creative team, and I'm in a show that I adore called Baby Loves Music, that is led by a colleague of mine called Eamon Sweeney, who is a Baroque guitarist. And that show is 3 extraordinary musicians, Eamon and an amazing fiddler and uilleann pipe player, and plays many other things, Tim Doyle, who's also from Bray, and an extraordinary cellist called Kate Hearn, who is from Dublin but now lives in Sweden, and me pretending to play a little bit of accordion, and occasionally a bit of double bass. And it's an instrumental gig for babies, and it's gorgeous music. It's classical music, it's Baroque music, it's traditional Irish music. And there's sort of vocal harmony work as well. There's some percussion stuff as well. And what I love about that show is that, and what I love about lots of the shows, is they defy what people think that audience is capable of. About 15 minutes into that show, we play uilleann pipes and a great big drum, which people would think, well, you can't do that for babies. I mean, some of the babies who come along are like a month old. But you can, if you take them on the journey to it. And one of the things I love is that parents who come along very anxious about how their baby might behave and if they might do the wrong thing, and then they just fall in love with their babies all over again, and then they're just sitting there going, my baby's so clever. But yes, so that show is going to the Wee Festival in Toronto in May, in the middle of the tour that I'm doing at the moment. So I'm really excited about that as well.
That's very soon.
It is very soon.
Bags packed.
It's very soon. We only sort of fairly recently found out that we had the funding from Culture Ireland to go and do that. So
amazing.
So yes, that's very soon, and I'm very fortunate that one of the things we've started to do, because we also think about how we work with performers, in that we have some amazing performers who can't do what we're doing at the moment, which is a 14-week tour. And so for all kinds of reasons. And so for the current tour, there's 3 performers at any one time, but there's 5 people who we've programmed to come in and out of that, so that people who, primarily because they have young children, can't do a massively long tour, so that those wonderful artists are not lost to our audience. And 2 of those performers are the amazing women who co-created the music for the show. So one of them is gonna sub in for me while I'm in Canada.
Oh, amazing. It's cool that you have swings nearly, or alternates, to kind of step in if they need that.
Yeah, and it is, it's that kind of patchwork cast is it is kind of programmed really tightly in advance to make sure we're covered. And and that's kind of had started happening last year a little bit, in that we had a fabulously eventful tour, in that and this is all planned, one of the cast went off for a week to go and get married, and another member of the cast who also designed the set for the show left the tour as planned 3 weeks early to go and have a baby.
Wow.
So it was all go.
It's all go, yeah. So much moving around in those kind of situations as well. Can I bring you back to 2015 and to Replay Theatre Company and your involvement in Baby Day? Do you want to explain what that was?
Yes, so Baby Day was Belfast City Council had decided that they wanted. I think it was 2013 when they launched the fund. So they decided that they wanted to have kind of citywide events that would capture the imagination of the city. And I remember it really, really, really vividly. I went along to this amazing woman called Helen Marriage, who ran a company called Artichoke, who did the Sultan's Elephant that moved through London, and there was a project with loads of little tents, and some of that happened on the coast of Ireland as well. And she just spoke really inspirationally about the events that she'd done, which really did capture the imagination of the cities that she was in. And I remember sitting and I just wrote down Culture Night for Babies. And so, and I didn't really, this often happens to me. It was like a 70s happening for children with complex needs. I have an idea and they go, what do I mean by that? And so then what we did was I then spent about a year speaking to everybody and anybody. And I'd been in Belfast since 2004. So, and it's a small place. So I'd managed to make some really lovely connections with an amazing range of artists and arts organizations. And I went and spoke to loads of people and said, this is the idea. This is what Baby Day is. And from the very beginning, it was really, again, politically important to me. There was kind of two things. One was that I was saying, this is not just a family fun day out. And we were really explicit about this. And this is not just a family fun day out. This is about our future. This is about our tiniest citizens. This is about the family that Belfast could be. And that was kind of the spiel that was the vision around it. But equally, there's an amazing research scientist called Suzanne Zedijk, who specializes in early years and who speaks all over the world really accessibly and passionately and inspirationally about early years neuroscience. And she said a really interesting, she came along to Baby Day, and then insanely the next day we did a big event that she was part of in Belfast. And she said to me, if you had called it Belfast Infant Mental Health Day, it would not have worked in the same way. And what I was saying in the same way, and I guess it's just always been like this, the same way that our shows respond to our audience. When I was speaking to those artists and organizations, some of which were arts organizations, some of which were non-arts organizations, I was saying, this is the vision. What do you want to do? So we had all kinds of things. We had somebody did a comedy show for early years. We did a series of science talks about babies that babies came to with their parents. There was a young writer called Finn Kennedy who wanted to interview women in their 70s and 80s about their experiences of motherhood and make a show for adults about that. There was a guy who made a show about fatherhood, again for adults. And we had tents on the lawn of City Hall. We had a Baby Day lullaby. So there was events that happened. There's about 80 events that happened several times in the day all over the city. And politically, it was crucial for me that the events happened all over the city, that it wasn't like the sexy events are going to happen in City Hall. And then if there'll be a few things in other places. Because the other thing that happened right from the very beginning is that we wanted Baby Day to be for everyone. And we wanted not just to pay lip service to that. So what we did was I made a baby show. It was my second baby show. It was called Tiny. And we toured that to every single Sure Start in Belfast. And we went to them on their terms, on their turf, introduced to these parents and their babies by organisations that they trusted, by the Sure Starts. And we did the performance, which was of a similarly high quality. And in fact, a week after Baby Day, again, because I don't know why I do this, we took Tiny to South Africa and helped start baby theatre in South Africa about a week later. Um, but so the idea was we did the show, which was really high quality, and then we said to them, this is part of a thing called Baby Day. If you're interested, we'll keep talking to you about Baby Day. And I had this amazing engagement coordinator called Sam Porcello, and she then worked with each of the Sure Starts to come up with a series of workshops that they were interested in. And then, so it kind of, we created a relationship with them, and lots of those families came to Baby Day, came to the city centre. And one of my favourite things that happened, that for me summed up the kind of momentary glory of it, was that, and we know this because Sam went back and talked to the various groups about what they did and where they went on Baby Day, and women from the Falls Road went up the Shankill Road to do a Bollywood dance workshop with their babies. So there was a pile of things happening, and the streets were full of prams, and it was a gorgeous, gorgeous day.
I'm just in awe of all the amazing steps that you've taken throughout just even a couple of minutes that we've talked around theatre making in general. I think it's like incredible to, like, I read up on you beforehand and did a lot of my research, but when it's coming from you, it actually is just incredible. What challenges do you think you face as a theatre maker in Ireland?
I mean, funding is always a challenge. I have been hugely well supported by the Arts Council and by my local county council, by Wicklow. And I've had amazing support from venues around the country. In 2020, I invited 10 of them to set up what I called a network for extraordinary audiences, which they're still really, really actively part of. And I think whilst funding is always an issue, we are hugely privileged to be part of a country which says that it has the arts at the heart of it, and the National Campaign for the Arts is the most extraordinary lobbying group. I'm in absolute awe of the work that they've done around funding, around the UBI. So it does feel like all of that is moving forward. There are lots of challenges within the arts in Ireland which don't impact on me, but I think how they do impact on me is about that sense of a really strong embedded culture of the arts. I think the closure of the complex is really, really problematic, and I think the fact that even in the time that I've been here, that lots of the art spaces in Dublin in particular have closed down. And I think for artists generally, and for lots of the artists that I work with, the whole kind of cost of living and the housing crisis are as problematic for them as they are for other people who aren't in particularly high earning jobs. But I moved here 10 years ago, and it seemed that it was a time at which both funders and venues were starting to become really interested in work for the audiences that I might work for. So I guess I kind of landed at the right time. And as I say, touch wood, the support from the Arts Council has been really solid, has been really longitudinal, and they have never asked why I have so few audience members. For me, politically, we pay our performers, a very good rate in terms of general kind of touring rates, because we have to find such extraordinary people. And the fact that we want to make things that are very beautiful, so our production budgets would be the same as any other touring company, even though we're only playing to 3 children at any time. And for that not to have been questioned, I think is an indication of something really positive.
Yes, absolutely. Your work has spanned over a huge amount of time, and I think we mentioned your proudest moment. is there any other projects that you stick out in your mind as being like their like
I mean,
landmark products for
I
you?
mean, I've been so fortunate with so many of the artists that I've worked with. Um, and I think particularly as I get quite a bit older, the notion of legacy is something that I love, and um I'm often asked to mentor other artists who are interested in moving into working with the audiences that I work with. Um, and with some of those, I have a kind of really long-term relationship. So, Eamon, who led Baby Loves Music, had made work for early years, but not babies. So he asked me to mentor him, and now he has this suite of work. I've worked since 2020 with an amazing dance artist, choreographer called Jess Rowell, who um, makes beautiful dance work for audiences of children with complex needs. And seeing um, that art form grow is really exciting. Um, and I guess in terms of legacy, about I can't remember how many years ago now it is because I can't count. In 1994, when I was at Dundee Rep, I accidentally set up a large-scale women's community singing group, and they're still going.
Oh,
And then when I
wow.
moved to Belfast, they came over for a visit and helped me set one up in 2006, and that one is still going. And the Dundee one had their, I think, their 30th birthday last year, and I love that.
That is incredible to have such a long period of time of like community groups being formed and created. Um, I think, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our podcast episode for today because this has been. I could talk to you for hours about all the different things. I think your life is so interesting. But to wrap it up, Ireland has a huge amount of young kind of creators and theatre makers. You've given so much advice to other kind of theatre makers and creators. What advice would you give to young theatre makers at the moment?
I think the big thing for me, and again, politically, I have a page on my website called The Why of It, is that I think if you know why you're doing what you're doing, you'll be okay. And I remember um, when COVID happened, we were actually in the middle of a tour. We were 3 weeks into what was supposed to be a 12-week baby tour. Um, and everybody started putting work online and all that kind of stuff was happening. And I was like, what do I do? How do I do it? And then I said to myself, you're constantly talking about the why. And I went back to it, and the why for me is about one human being connecting with another. And I knew that that could not happen online. Um, and so we hired a camper van, and we took a dry land version of our pool show round individual families' gardens and driveways for 4 weeks. Um, and yeah, so I think, and that anchors me is to go, well, why do I do this? And I go, it's about human connection. So that, and also there are some times where you can get very excited about something you're making because you really like it, or an element of a show. And I always come back to going, well, who is this for? Who is this for? I have to like it, obviously, but if it doesn't serve a human connection, if it doesn't serve to connect our performers with our audiences, then it's for another show or it's for something else.
Amazing. Anna, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. Do you want to share maybe some of the upcoming projects and where we can find you on social media, perhaps, or where people can get tickets to your upcoming productions?
Of course, most of our shows for this year are working with partner organisations and they invite their service users or their pupils. So at the moment as I said, we're doing a 14-week tour of Up in the Clouds, primarily to special schools and to national schools that have a unit for children with additional support needs. We are, however, next week, in fact, we always do a couple of publicly bookable shows for, it can either be young people who are no longer in education, or it can be children who are going to a school that we're not visiting, or sometimes it's children from a school who we have visited who've had a great time and their parents bring them. So those are happening next week on Wednesday and Thursday in Leixlip Library. It's bookable through my amazing co-producers Riverbank Art Centre. And then I'm doing Baby Loves Music in Canada. And then in June, we're touring Baby Loves Music, a kind of small tour that's primarily Dublin and surroundings, but I think we're also going to Hawkswell as well. And that will be on sale in the particular venues. I also I have a page on my website's annanewell.ie, and there's a page which is called Currently Touring, and I always have dates and people can contact me through the website. And then for the rest of the summer and into the autumn, we are doing a 9-week tour of our hydrotherapy pool show, which is going primarily to branches of Enable, but also to St Gabriel's Foundation and to the Central Remedial Clinic in Clontarf and to the Babura Festival in Galway. And then we finish up the year with something we've been doing, which is a project I have particular fondness for, that we've been doing for the last few years. We're doing, we do versions of our shows without the tent, for one person at a time around bedsides in children's hospital settings. So we are doing a week of that in hospital settings in the autumn. And our relationship with Children's Health Ireland is really exciting to me. And we've been talking a lot about how we might be part of the move into the Children's Hospital. But also if other artists or other stakeholders want to come and observe shows, that can often be possible. Or if I haven't rambled incessantly enough, if people have questions, then my email is on my website, and I'm always happy to answer questions.
Anna, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing where your projects go next.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Places Please, Richard's Theatre podcast, hosted by me, Richard Brown. Audio engineering and editing by Conor Gill. Stay tuned for a sneak peek of our next episode.
Safe was extremely fun, brilliant fun. I've been a fan of Michael C. Hall because of Dexter. And we had a really exciting scene in the last episode. I was responsible for burning down a building with a group of friends. So it was a very fast-paced, action-led scene. It's really fun to sort of be able to sort of respond to things in the moment. And it was very fast-paced and high-octane. Just a brilliant experience.